Fritz Haarmann, born on October 25, 1879, in Hanover, Germany, would become one of the most notorious figures in German criminal history. Known as the Butcher of Hanover, Haarmann's crimes shocked a nation already grappling with the social upheaval of the post-World War I era. His name became synonymous with gruesome violence, manipulation, and a chilling ability to conceal his monstrous acts beneath a facade of normalcy. Haarmann's early life offered little to suggest the horrors he would later commit. Born to a working-class family, he experienced a childhood marked by instability and exposure to criminal behavior. Accounts indicate that Haarmann exhibited troubling tendencies from an early age, including theft, cruelty to animals, and a fascination with violence. In adolescence, he joined the army, serving a brief stint that did little to curb his darker impulses. By the time he returned to Hanover, Haarmann had already demonstrated the cunning and manipulativeness that would later define his killings. The social climate of Hanover in the early 20th century played a role in enabling Haarmann. The city's working-class neighborhoods were densely populated, with many young men living transient lives due to unemployment and poverty following World War I. Homeless or runaway youths became easy targets, vulnerable, trusting, and often invisible to authorities. Haarmann used this environment to his advantage. He began by ingratiating himself with young boys, many of whom were homeless or living on the streets. Haarmann presented himself as a friend, a mentor, even a benefactor. He offered food, shelter, and work, creating a bond of dependency. Once trust was established, he would lure his victims into isolated areas or his home, where he committed acts of sexual assault and ultimately murder. Haarmann's killing method was both calculated and horrifying. He often strangled his victims with his hands, sometimes using improvised ligatures. After death, he would dismember the bodies, disposing of them in the River Lean or selling body parts, including human flesh, to unsuspecting buyers, a fact that added to his notoriety and fueled sensational media coverage. His crimes were methodical. Haarmann took care to avoid leaving evidence that could immediately incriminate him, relying on both the vulnerability of his victims and the inefficiency of local law enforcement to delay detection. The first suspicions about Haarmann arose in the early 1920s, when several young boys disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Families reported their children missing, yet due to the victims' social status of poor, homeless, or marginalized, the cases received minimal attention. Local authorities, stretched thin and sometimes dismissive, initially failed to connect the disappearances to a single perpetrator. Haarmann's public persona provided additional cover. He worked as a police informant, reporting petty crimes and providing tips that earned him a reputation as helpful and trustworthy. This dual role allowed him to stay close to investigations while remaining above suspicion, a macabre irony that made his eventual capture even more shocking. The scale of Haarmann's crimes became undeniable. By 1924, investigators discovered multiple dismembered bodies in and around Hanover. Forensic evidence, combined with eyewitness accounts from boys who had escaped his predation, finally led authorities to Haarmann. His arrest revealed a horrifying pattern. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 24 confirmed victims, though some estimates suggest the true number may have exceeded 30. Most victims were boys aged between 10 and 20, chosen for their vulnerability and social invisibility. Haarmann's trial in 1924 captivated Germany. The court hearings were intense, drawing crowds and press eager to understand the mind behind such monstrous acts. During the trial, Haarmann displayed a disturbing combination of arrogance and manipulation, attempting to downplay his actions while simultaneously showing knowledge of criminal methodology. Witnesses, including surviving victims and family members of the deceased, recounted the trust Haarmann had exploited and the brutal murders he had committed. The prosecution presented evidence of strangulation, dismemberment, and body disposal, alongside Haarmann's own confessions, which he delivered in a matter-of-fact tone. The gruesome nature of the crimes, combined with the betrayal of trust, created public outrage. When the court pronounced a death sentence, it was widely considered a moral and societal necessity, reflecting both the scale of his offenses and the fear he had instilled in the community. Haarmann was executed by guillotine on April 15, 1925. Even in death, the case continued to haunt Germany. His crimes prompted a national conversation about juvenile vulnerability, the responsibility of police, and the dangers posed by individuals who could manipulate trust for predation. Social reforms in the wake of Haarmann's murders included improved oversight of homeless youth, stricter police procedures, and greater public awareness of sexual predation. The psychological profile of Fritz Haarmann continues to intrigue criminologists. Experts cite a combination of sadistic tendencies, sexual deviance, and pathological manipulation. His ability to charm and deceive, particularly using his position as a helper to marginalized youth, demonstrates a chilling understanding of human psychology and societal blind spots. Haarmann was not merely violent, he was calculating, strategic, and terrifyingly effective at exploiting weaknesses in both his victims and the institutions meant to protect them. For modern audiences, Haarmann's story is a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked predatory behavior, the vulnerabilities of marginalized populations, and the dangers of institutional negligence. It challenges us to consider how social structures, poverty, and trust intersect to create opportunities for evil to flourish. Fritz Haarmann's legacy remains as one of Germany's darkest chapters in criminal history, a story of innocence betrayed, trust exploited, and a community forever scarred by the calculated horrors of a single man. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Peter Kürten, born on May 26, 1883, in Molheim, Germany, would become infamous as one of the most sadistic and calculated serial killers in German history. Known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf for his disturbing tendency to drink the blood of his victims, Kürten's crimes spanned decades and left a trail of terror across the Rhineland during the early 20th century. His name became synonymous with sexualized violence, unpredictability, and a chilling lack of remorse. Kürten's early life was marked by extreme hardship and dysfunction. He grew up in a working-class household with an abusive father, Peter Kürten Sr., whose violent temper and harsh discipline left deep psychological scars. Reports indicate that young Peter experienced beatings, humiliation, and exposure to adult sexual behavior that he could not comprehend. His father often demanded obedience through fear, teaching lessons of dominance and punishment that would later manifest in Peter's criminal tendencies. By adolescence, Kürten had already displayed alarming behaviors. He was known to have committed petty theft, arson, and acts of cruelty toward animals, signaling early signs of sociopathy. During his teenage years, he also began experimenting with sexual violence, assaulting both peers and younger children. These early offenses foreshadowed a life increasingly devoted to thrill-seeking, sadism, and manipulation. The social and economic conditions of post-World War I Germany further shaped Kürten's trajectory. The Rhineland, including Düsseldorf, experienced severe instability, unemployment, and societal dislocation. Homeless youth, women walking home alone at night, and marginalized citizens became easy targets for a predator who understood both fear and opportunity. Kürten's killing spree began in the 1910s but escalated dramatically in the 1920s and early 1930s. His crimes were characterized by sexual assault, brutal physical violence, and, in some cases, blood drinking, hence the nickname vampire. He targeted both men and women, though many victims were women and children. His methods were varied and unpredictable. Sometimes he attacked in public, other times he lured victims into secluded areas. He would strangle, stab, or bludgeon his victims, often inflicting excessive wounds and post-mortem mutilation. What set Kürten apart from many other serial killers of his time was his psychological gratification. He derived pleasure not only from the act of killing, but from instilling fear, witnessing suffering, and manipulating the environment around him. Survivors described him as calm, polite, and almost charming before the attack, traits that allowed him to lure victims without arousing suspicion. The first major public awareness of Kürten's activities came in the late 1920s, as a series of murders and assaults spread panic across Düsseldorf. Citizens began avoiding walking alone at night. Parents restricted the movements of their children. The police were under immense pressure to solve a string of violent crimes that appeared random, unpredictable, and terrifyingly intimate. Despite early investigative failures, law enforcement eventually connected multiple murders through patterns of method, location, and victim profile. Witnesses described a man of average build with a calm demeanor, often appearing in public moments before assaults. Survivors' testimonies were crucial, providing descriptions and insights into Kürten's behavior that allowed the police to narrow down suspects. Peter Kürten's capture in 1930 followed a tip from an eyewitness and meticulous police work. Once in custody, Kürten demonstrated a disturbing combination of intelligence, composure, and confession. He freely admitted to numerous murders, assaults, and instances of blood drinking, describing his crimes in chilling detail without apparent remorse. Psychologists at the time analyzed his confessions, noting a lack of empathy and a pronounced need for stimulation through fear and violence. During his trial, Kürten's notoriety captured the attention of both the public and the media. Newspapers sensationalized his crimes, portraying him as a vampire and highlighting his grotesque fascination with blood. The courtroom proceedings were intense, with survivors, families of victims, and journalists present. Kürten did not attempt to evade responsibility, often seeming almost proud of his actions. Experts examined him extensively, debating whether he was insane or fully aware of the moral and legal consequences of his acts. The court ultimately sentenced Peter Kürten to death, rejecting claims of insanity due to his methodical planning, evasion of detection, and coherent confessions. On July 2, 1931, Kürten was executed by guillotine. His execution was witnessed by officials and reported widely, cementing his infamy in German criminal history. Kürten's legacy extends beyond his killings. Criminologists and psychologists have studied his case extensively to understand the intersection of sexual sadism, compulsion, and violent pathology. His ability to maintain a facade of normalcy, manipulate social structures, and exploit both psychological and physical vulnerabilities makes him a particularly chilling figure in the study of serial violence. The social impact of Kürten's crimes was profound. Communities were traumatized, public fear reshaped daily behaviors, and trust in local safety eroded. His attacks highlighted the vulnerability of women and children in urban environments and emphasized the necessity of improved policing, forensic methods, and public awareness campaigns. Even decades later, the story of Peter Kürten remains a grim reminder of human depravity and the capacity for cruelty when early trauma, psychological deviation, and social opportunity converge. His crimes were not merely acts of violence, they were demonstrations of control, terror, and the darkest aspects of human psychology. For modern audiences, Kürten embodies a dual lesson: the importance of vigilance and social responsibility, and the chilling reality that even ordinary-seeming individuals can harbor monstrous impulses, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. The vampire of Düsseldorf is remembered not just for the horror of his acts, but for the enduring lessons about evil, concealed behind the mask of normalcy. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Joachim Kroll, the Ruhr cannibal. Joachim Kroll, born on April 17, 1933, in Hindenburg, Germany now, Zobraz, Poland, became one of the most notorious serial killers in post-war Germany, known as the Ruhr cannibal or the Ruhr killer. Kroll's crimes spanned nearly 2 decades, horrifying the industrial Ruhr region with a combination of murder, necrophilia, and acts of cannibalism. His name would become synonymous with stealth, manipulation, and the terrifying ability of a predator to live an ordinary life while committing the most gruesome atrocities. Kroll's early life was marked by familial dysfunction and psychological instability. Born to a working-class family, he grew up in a household characterized by neglect, a domineering father, and exposure to violence. Reports suggest that young Kroll was socially isolated, prone to mood swings, and displayed early tendencies toward cruelty. He was fascinated with death and dissection from a young age, a fixation that would later manifest in his methodical and perverse crimes. Kroll's adolescent years were punctuated by brushes with the law. In 1949, at the age of 16, he attempted his first known murder by attacking a young girl, an act for which he was institutionalized briefly in a juvenile facility. Psychological reports at the time noted antisocial behavior, a lack of empathy, and emerging sexual deviance. Despite this early warning, Kroll was released and returned to civilian life, a decision that would have catastrophic consequences in the years to follow. After his release, Kroll worked in various trades, eventually settling as a laborer in the Ruhr region, a densely populated industrial area in western Germany. He married and had children, presenting an outwardly normal life that concealed his dark impulses. Friends and neighbors considered him quiet, unassuming, and even helpful. The perfect camouflage for someone living a double life as a predator. Kroll's killings began in earnest in the 1950s and continued sporadically into the 1970s. He targeted young women, girls, and occasionally men, often selecting victims who were isolated or vulnerable. The murders were characterized by a calculated and chilling precision. He would lure victims to secluded areas, sometimes offering them work or companionship, then strangle or bludgeon them to death. Post-mortem, Kroll engaged in acts of necrophilia and dismemberment, often storing or disposing of body parts in a way that allowed him to continue living undetected. The cannibalism aspect of Kroll's crimes earned him infamy. He admitted during interrogation to consuming parts of some victims, claiming he derived both sexual gratification and psychological satisfaction from the act. While Kroll's explanations were disturbingly clinical, the behavior reflected a profound detachment from moral and social norms. Coupled with the compulsive satisfaction of his own perverse desires, Kroll's ability to evade detection for decades can be attributed to multiple factors. His quiet, family-oriented public persona deflected suspicion. The Ruhr region, with its industrial density and transient population, provided ample opportunity for Kroll to commit murders without immediate notice. Furthermore, early law enforcement methods lacked the sophistication of modern forensic science, and the sporadic nature of his crimes made pattern recognition difficult. Victims were often reported missing only after weeks or months, and initial investigations frequently failed to connect the cases. The first breakthrough in Kroll's capture came in 1976, following the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl, Brigitte W., who had been reported missing near Kroll's residence. Investigators, prompted by a tip and inconsistencies in Kroll's statements, began examining his property. During a search, they discovered human remains, personal effects belonging to victims, and extensive evidence linking Kroll to multiple murders. His arrest sent shockwaves through the Ruhr region, shattering the community's perception of safety and revealing the horrifying extent of his crimes. During interrogation and trial, Kroll confessed to 14 confirmed murders, though some experts believe the actual number may have been higher. His confessions detailed not only the killings but also the psychological compulsion, driving them an obsessive need for control, sexual gratification, and the ritualized disposal of bodies. Kroll exhibited minimal remorse, explaining his acts with cold rationalizations rather than emotional empathy, a trait that profoundly disturbed both the public and the court. The trial in 1977 became one of the most sensational in German history. Survivors, witnesses, and family members of victims provided testimony that underscored the terror Kroll had inflicted over 2 decades. Psychologists examined him extensively, diagnosing him with antisocial personality disorder and severe paraphilic tendencies. The court ultimately found Kroll guilty of multiple counts of murder, sexual assault, and desecration of corpses, sentencing him to life imprisonment. Kroll spent the remainder of his life in prison, where he reportedly continued to display a detached, unrepentant demeanor. He died of a heart attack on July 1, 1991, leaving behind a legacy of horror, trauma, and profound questions about how one individual could perpetrate such systematic violence while maintaining a veneer of ordinary life. The societal impact of Kroll's crimes was significant. Communities in the Ruhr region, once confident in their safety, experienced enduring fear and mistrust. Families became vigilant about the movements of their children, and local authorities were pressured to improve investigative methods and victim protection protocols. Kroll's case highlighted not only the extreme dangers posed by serial predators but also the limitations of mid-20th century policing in detecting and preventing long-term predatory behavior. Kroll's psychological profile has been studied extensively in criminology. Experts note his compulsive need for control, sexualized violence, and meticulous planning as hallmarks of a high-functioning psychopath. Unlike some serial killers who act impulsively, Kroll demonstrated long-term strategic thinking, exploiting social systems, familial trust, and the invisibility of marginalized individuals to commit atrocities over decades. The legacy of Joachim Kroll remains, a chilling reminder of human depravity and the capacity for ordinary appearances to conceal extraordinary evil. His crimes forced Germany to confront the vulnerabilities in social structures, the importance of vigilant policing, and the necessity of early intervention when warning signs of violent pathology emerge. For modern audiences, Kroll serves as both a cautionary tale and a study in the darkest aspects of human behavior. A predator who combined cunning, sexual sadism, and ritualized violence, leaving a permanent scar on the collective memory of the Ruhr region and German criminal history. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Karl Denke, born on May 12, 1870, in Münsterberg, Germany, modern-day Ibs, Poland, remains one of Germany's most mysterious and gruesome serial killers. Known posthumously as the Cannibal of Münsterberg, Denke's crimes, though largely concealed during his lifetime, reveal a shocking pattern of calculated murder, deception, and the macabre practice of consuming human flesh. Unlike more widely publicized killers, Denke operated with quiet precision, making him both terrifying and enigmatic in the annals of criminal history. Denke was raised in a modest household in Münsterberg, a town situated in Silesia. Reports suggest his early life was largely unremarkable. He worked as a prosperous businessman, running a local market stall where he sold goods ranging from fruit and vegetables to livestock. Known to neighbors as polite, industrious, and unassuming, Denke presented the appearance of a reliable and respectable citizen. Friends and acquaintances considered him generous and community-minded, a man who could be trusted. A facade that would ultimately conceal decades of horrific crimes. By the early 1900s, Denke began luring men to his home with promises of work or friendship. His victims were often transient individuals, wanderers, laborers, or those with few connections, people who could disappear without drawing immediate attention. The choice of marginalized or socially invisible victims would later prove critical in allowing Denke to continue his crimes without early detection. Denke's method of killing was both calculated and chilling. He would strangle or asphyxiate his victims, often exploiting trust and familiarity to ensure compliance. Following the murders, he dismembered the bodies, sometimes salting and smoking the flesh to preserve it. Denke then sold human meat to unsuspecting customers at his market stall, masking one of the most grotesque aspects of his crimes beneath the veneer of everyday commerce. Witnesses and later investigators describe the meticulous care with which he executed these acts, highlighting a combination of sadism, ingenuity, and premeditation rarely seen in criminal history. The first evidence of Denke's criminal activity emerged tragically by accident in 1924. Denke had attempted suicide, leaving behind a note in which he confessed to killing multiple individuals. His death and the note triggered a search of his property, revealing a horrifying cache of human remains, detailed records of his killings, and evidence of cannibalism. Investigators discovered that Denke had murdered and consumed dozens of victims over the years, though the exact number remains uncertain due to incomplete documentation and the loss of potential evidence. The case of Karl Denke drew immediate attention due to the sheer audacity and macabre ingenuity of his crimes. Public outrage was intense. Neighbors and townspeople struggled to reconcile the polite, community-minded merchant they had known with the monstrous killer revealed posthumously. The revelation challenged assumptions about ordinary appearances, community trust, and the ability of an individual to operate outside the law while engaging in prolonged predatory behavior. Denke's killings were not only acts of violence, but also reflected psychological compulsion. Experts analyzing his case posthumously have suggested traits consistent with psychopathy, sexual deviance, and extreme antisocial tendencies. Unlike impulsive offenders, Denke demonstrated careful planning, social manipulation, and a chilling ability to conceal the crimes for decades, all while maintaining a public persona of respectability. The societal and psychological impact of Denke's crimes extended beyond the immediate horror. The notion that human flesh could be unknowingly purchased at a local market fueled widespread fear, moral panic, and fascination. Denke became a case study in the dangers of social invisibility, demonstrating how societal neglect, marginalized populations, and blind trust can create the conditions for prolonged abuse and predation. For modern criminologists and psychologists, Denke's life offers a glimpse into the mind of a methodical serial killer whose outward normalcy belied monstrous inner compulsions. His ability to integrate his crimes into ordinary social and commercial activity highlights the terrifying adaptability of human redditors and the challenges faced by early 20th century law enforcement in detecting sophisticated offenders. Though Denke died before facing formal trial, his legacy endures in the collective memory of Germany's criminal history. The Cannibal of Münsterberg serves as both a cautionary tale and a case study of extreme human deviance, illustrating how ordinary environments, small towns, markets, and trusted households can conceal extraordinary evil. Denke's story is ultimately a meditation on trust, invisibility, and deception. His victims were silenced by circumstance, social neglect, and the careful orchestration of a predator who understood human behavior deeply. For contemporary audiences, the lessons are both chilling and necessary. Vigilance, awareness of social vulnerabilities, and understanding that monstrous acts often hide behind a facade of normalcy. The horror of Karl Denke is not only in the acts themselves, but in the realization that a seemingly ordinary man could commit repeated atrocities for decades, fully aware, methodical, and entirely undetected until chance exposed his grisly reality to a shocked and horrified world. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Volker Eckert, the truck stop killer. Volker Eckert, born on February 21, 1959, in West Germany, was a cold and calculating serial killer whose crimes spanned more than 2 decades, leaving a trail of terror across Germany and Europe. Dubbed the truck stop killer, Eckert exploited his work as a long-haul truck driver to travel freely across borders, using remote truck stops, motels, and highways as hunting grounds. His crimes, committed with methodical precision, highlight the chilling combination of mobility, opportunity, and predatory cunning that allowed him to evade detection for years. Eckert's early life offers little insight into the monstrous trajectory he would later pursue. Born into a working-class family, he displayed signs of social awkwardness and emotional detachment from a young age. While not outwardly violent in childhood, he exhibited traits psychologists would later associate with psychopathy, impulsivity, lack of empathy, and a fascination with control and dominance. As he grew older, he was drawn to jobs that allowed autonomy, travel, and independence, traits that would later facilitate his crimes. By the 1980s, Eckert was employed as a long-haul truck driver, a career that enabled him to traverse Germany, Denmark, the Czech Republic, and other parts of Europe. The nature of his work provided both mobility and anonymity, crucial elements for a predator targeting vulnerable individuals. Truck stops, rest areas, and motels became hunting grounds, places where transient populations, often women working in bars, nightclubs, or as sex workers, could be isolated and lured. Eckert exploited both the victim's vulnerabilities and the transient nature of these locations to carry out his crimes without drawing early suspicion. Eckert's first confirmed murders occurred in the 1980s, though investigators later believed he may have begun earlier. His modus operandi was disturbingly consistent. He would approach women, often under the guise of offering work, companionship, or transportation. Once trust was established, Eckert would overpower his victims, frequently strangling them to death. He displayed a precise understanding of how to control victims, using both physical dominance and psychological manipulation to ensure compliance. What made Eckert particularly dangerous was his ability to cover his tracks. He frequently disposed of bodies in remote locations, such as forests, rivers, or secluded fields near highways, making discovery difficult. When bodies were found, decomposition and lack of identifying features complicated forensic identification, delaying police investigations. The combination of mobility, victim selection, and methodical disposal allowed Eckert to commit multiple murders over years without immediate detection. Victims of Eckert were primarily women aged 18 to 40, often chosen for their vulnerability and limited social support. Many were sex workers, travelers, or women estranged from family, making it less likely their disappearances would be immediately noticed. Survivors, when they escaped his attacks, reported the same calm, controlled demeanor. Eckert appeared ordinary, friendly, and non-threatening before committing his crimes, a tactic that allowed him to disarm victims before striking. The first concrete suspicion of Eckert's activities arose in the early 2000s, when law enforcement in Germany began connecting unsolved murders and disappearances of women along truck routes. Forensic analysis, witness reports, and geographic profiling suggested a mobile perpetrator operating along major transportation corridors. Investigators noted the similarity of victim profiles and methods of killing, prompting cooperation between regional and national police agencies. Eckert's eventual capture in 2006 was the result of diligent police work, witness testimonies, and emerging forensic technology. Authorities linked him to multiple murders in Germany, as well as in Denmark and the Czech Republic. His arrest revealed the scope of his crimes. By the time of his detention, he had admitted to at least 7 confirmed murders, though law enforcement suspected he was responsible for as many as 20 or more. During interrogation, Eckert displayed a chilling combination of calmness and calculation. He confessed to murders without apparent remorse, offering detailed accounts of his methods, victim selection, and disposal practices. Psychologists analyzing his behavior noted a profound lack of empathy, compulsive sexual and control-driven impulses, and a meticulous attention to avoiding detection. Unlike some serial killers who act impulsively, Eckert was deliberate, strategic, and fully aware of the legal and moral consequences of his actions. The trial of Volker Eckert captivated the media across Europe. Court proceedings highlighted both the terrifying efficiency of his killings and the vulnerabilities of victims working in transient high-risk environments. Families of the deceased provided testimony that underscored the human cost of his crimes, while experts discussed the psychological profile of a predator who leveraged work, mobility, and societal neglect to commit repeated murders. Eckert's demeanor, in court cold, articulate, and unrepentant, further intensified public fascination and horror. Eckert was sentenced to life imprisonment, a verdict reflecting both the brutality of his crimes and the danger he posed to society. He remained incarcerated until his death in 2007, when he was found hanged in his prison cell, an act some speculate was a form of final control over his own fate, whether suicide or orchestrated. His death closed a chapter on one of Germany's most mobile and elusive serial killers, but left lingering questions about victims yet unidentified. The societal impact of Eckert's crimes was profound. His case exposed weaknesses in cross-border policing, highlighting how mobile offenders could exploit gaps between jurisdictions. It also underscored the vulnerability of marginalized women, particularly those working in transient professions or living on society's edges. In the wake of his capture, authorities implemented improved communication, victim protection strategies, and investigative collaboration between European nations to prevent similar predatory patterns. Criminologists studying Eckert have emphasized his strategic approach, ability to blend into ordinary society, and exploitation of occupational mobility as key factors enabling prolonged criminal activity. Unlike killers who rely solely on opportunity, Eckert meticulously planned his crimes, selected victims to minimize risk, and leveraged social and geographic anonymity to avoid detection, a combination that allowed him to operate undetected for decades. The legacy of Volker Eckert is a chilling testament to the dangers posed by predators operating with mobility, planning, and a profound lack of empathy. His crimes serve as a cautionary tale about the intersection of societal neglect, occupational autonomy, and psychological pathology. For modern audiences, Eckert embodies the terrifying reality that danger can exist behind ordinary appearances, within routine professions, and along familiar highways, where victims may be isolated and invisible to broader society. Ultimately, Eckert's story forces reflection on systemic failures, the human cost of negligence, and the enduring scars left on families and communities. His crimes are remembered not just for their brutality, but for the insight they provide into the mind of a calculating, mobile, and merciless predator who terrorized Germany and Europe, leaving behind lessons in vigilance, law enforcement coordination, and the enduring need to protect the most vulnerable members of society. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Fritz Honka, born on July 31, 1935, in Leipzig, Germany, became one of the most notorious serial killers in post-war German history. known as the Hamburg Monster. Honka preyed upon vulnerable women in Hamburg's red light districts during the 1970s. His crimes were characterized by extreme violence, mutilation, and exploitation of marginalized victims, earning him infamy for both the brutality of his murders and the systemic failures that allowed him to operate undetected for years. Honka's early life was deeply troubled, marked by abuse, neglect, and early exposure to criminal behavior. He was born into a working-class family in Leipzig during a period of immense social upheaval following World War II. His father reportedly abandoned the family, leaving Honka and his siblings to be raised by a distant, emotionally cold mother. Accounts of his childhood describe early signs of social maladjustment, impulsivity, and violent tendencies. Honka was reportedly aggressive, engaging in petty theft and violent outbursts during his adolescence, foreshadowing the violent impulses that would later define his adult life. As a young adult, Honka moved to Hamburg, a city rebuilding after the war. Known for its bustling port, nightlife, and transient populations, he found work sporadically, often in low-paying labor jobs, and struggled with alcoholism, a factor that would exacerbate his violent tendencies. The red light districts of Hamburg, with their concentration of sex workers, homeless women, and marginalized individuals, presented opportunities for a predator seeking control and domination. Honka integrated himself into this environment, cultivating the appearance of an unremarkable, if somewhat rough, local man. Honka's killing spree began in the early 1970s. He primarily targeted women who were socially isolated, struggling with addiction, or otherwise vulnerable. Many were sex workers whom society often ignored, making them ideal victims in Honka's mind. He would lure them to his residence on Hohenfeld, a neighborhood in Hamburg, under the pretext of companionship, alcohol, or lodging. Once inside, Honka's violent impulses would manifest with shocking ferocity. The method of Honka's murders involved extreme physical violence. Victims were often beaten severely, strangled, or bludgeoned. In some cases, he dismembered the bodies post-mortem, storing remains in his apartment in a macabre effort to avoid detection. He also attempted to conceal evidence using rudimentary methods, such as burning or freezing remains. His apartment, discovered after his eventual arrest, revealed horrifying traces of decay, human remains, and evidence of multiple murders. The level of planning and the brutality of his acts painted a chilling portrait of a man consumed by violence and compulsion. Honka's crimes remained undetected for years for several reasons. First, his victims were socially marginalized, often estranged from family and friends, making their disappearances less noticeable. Second, his outward appearance as a solitary, quiet man allowed him to blend into his neighborhood without arousing suspicion. Third, Hamburg's police at the time were ill-equipped to investigate serial killings involving transient populations, lacking forensic techniques and interdepartmental communication that modern law enforcement would later employ. The first major break in the investigation came in 1975. Following the disappearance of multiple women in the St. Georg district, neighbors reported foul odors emanating from Honka's apartment, prompting a police search. The authorities discovered the full extent of his crimes: preserved and dismembered human remains, personal effects of victims, and evidence linking him to at least 4 confirmed murders. Though suspicions suggested additional unreported killings, Honka's trial, which began in 1976, drew significant public attention. The gruesome nature of his crimes, combined with the social vulnerability of his victims, sparked outrage and fear across Hamburg. During the proceedings, witnesses recounted encounters with Honka, describing his manipulative, controlling behavior and the sudden, brutal violence he inflicted. Psychologists analyzed his personality, highlighting traits of antisocial personality disorder, sadism, and compulsive violent impulses. Honka's own testimony reflected a mixture of detachment, limited remorse, and attempts to rationalize his actions. The court ultimately sentenced Fritz Honka to life imprisonment for multiple counts of murder. He spent the remainder of his life incarcerated, dying in prison on October 19, 1998, from natural causes. While imprisoned, he remained a figure of fascination for criminologists, journalists, and the public, representing a disturbing example of the extremes of human violence. The societal impact of Honka's crimes was multifaceted. Hamburg's red light districts experienced increased police scrutiny, social awareness campaigns, and greater protection for sex workers. The case exposed the dangers faced by marginalized populations and highlighted systemic failures in law enforcement and social services, particularly regarding transient or vulnerable individuals. Families and communities were left grappling with the horror of violence that had occurred largely unnoticed, prompting broader discussions about societal responsibility and protective measures. Criminologists studying Honka's behavior have emphasized several critical aspects of his pathology. His combination of impulsivity, predation, and compulsive violence, coupled with an ability to blend into ordinary society, illustrates the terrifying efficiency of serial predators. Unlike killers who rely solely on opportunistic attacks, Honka demonstrated methodical planning, a keen understanding of victim vulnerability, and a chilling lack of empathy. His crimes underscore the capacity for extreme violence to coexist with outward normalcy, a trait that complicates detection and intervention. Fritz Honka's legacy remains a stark reminder of the dangers of social invisibility, isolation, and systemic negligence. His ability to perpetrate multiple murders over years, undetected by authorities, reflects both individual pathology and societal blind spots. For modern audiences, the Hamburg monster embodies the terrifying intersection of predatory instinct, social marginalization, and the failure of community structures to protect the vulnerable. The horror of Honka's crimes extends beyond the act of killing. It lies in the betrayal of trust, the exploitation of vulnerability, and the reminder that monsters can exist behind ordinary facades. His story continues to serve as a case study in criminology, sociology, and psychology, emphasizing the need for vigilance, protective measures for marginalized populations, and awareness of the subtle signs that can precede violent acts. Ultimately, Fritz Honka's life and crimes are remembered not merely for the brutality of his actions, but for the lessons they offer, that human evil can operate quietly, persistently, and undetected, and that societies must remain alert to protect those most at risk from predation and violence. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary.